They still called me the slow one even at 29. My mother would offer to read menus for me, unaware I had approved the restaurant's corporate strategy. On Christmas, as they toasted my sister as the genius, I fingered the director of operations letter in my bag from the very company that had just rejected her internship. This is not a fairy tale. It is the record of a reputation murder that happened right over dinner. My name is Leona Whitestone. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my sedan, feeling the heated seats fight against the chill of the Connecticut winter seeping through the glass. To anyone passing me on the interstate, I looked like just another successful young professional heading home for the holidays. The car was sleek, black, and expensive, the kind of vehicle that whispered money rather than shouted it. But to my family, this car was nothing more than a rental I had splurged on to keep up appearances. I had even left a generic rental agreement on the passenger seat, just in case my mother decided to snoop. It was a necessary layer of camouflage. In the world of the Whitestones, I was not allowed to own a car that cost more than my sister's annual wardrobe budget. I was Leona, the slow one, Leona, the struggler, Leona, the charity case. As the familiar exit sign for our affluent suburb approached, a heavy stone of dread settled in my stomach. It was a physical sensation, cold and sharp, one I had associated with that zip code for as long as I could remember. The trees here were perfectly manicured, the driveways long and winding, and the judgment hanging in the air was thicker than the fog rolling off the sound. I was 29 years old. I managed a budget of $40 million a quarter. I led a team of 150 people, but as the miles ticked down, I could feel myself shrinking. I could feel the confident, articulate woman I was in the boardroom dissolving, replaced by the stuttering, wide-eyed girl who could not read the chalkboard. My childhood was defined by a diagnosis that never came. Back then, the words on the page did not just sit still. They swam. They danced and reversed themselves, mocking me. I would stare at a simple sentence in a reading circle, sweating cold bullets, while the other children sighed with impatience. Dyslexia was the answer, but in the Whitestone house, we did not believe in learning disabilities. We believed in effort and intellect. If you could not read, it was not because your brain was wired differently, it was because you were not trying hard enough, or worse, because you were simply dim. My mother, Patricia, was a woman who curated her life like a museum exhibit. She was beautiful in a brittle, terrifying way, always perfectly coiffed, always armed with a passive-aggressive compliment. To her, my struggles were not a medical issue. They were a social embarrassment. I remember bringing home a spelling test when I was 8 years old. It was covered in red ink, a massacre of reversed letters and phonetic guesses. Patricia had looked at it, then at me, with a gaze that was not angry, but filled with a pity so profound it felt like a slap. She had smoothed my hair and said that it was all right, that not everyone could be like Julianne, and that the world always needed people to do the simple jobs. She called me her sweet disappointment, though she never used those exact words. It was in the way she simplified her sentences when she spoke to me. It was in the way she checked my shoes were tied when I was 12. It was the soft bigotry of low expectations. And then there was Julianne, my sister, the prodigy. Julianne was 2 years older and light years ahead in their eyes. She did not just read, she devoured. She did not just speak, she performed. She had a way of tilting her head and offering a sympathetic smile that made you feel small and grateful for her attention all at once. She learned early on that my failure was the perfect backdrop for her brilliance. If I dropped a plate, Julianne was there to sweep it up and tell Mother not to be harsh because Leona was clumsy. If I stuttered over a word at dinner, Julianne would finish the sentence for me, using a more complex vocabulary word, beaming at her own helpfulness. She was the golden child, polished to a blinding shine. The divide between us became a canyon when college applications arrived. The expectation for a Whitestone was the Ivy League. Julianne, naturally, was paraded around as a future Yale or Harvard graduate. Whether she actually had the grades was a mystery kept within the walls of my parents' bedroom. But the narrative was what mattered. When my own standardized test scores came back, they were average, not terrible, just average. But in my mother's eyes, average was a death sentence. I remember the family meeting at the kitchen island. My father sat silently, drinking his scotch, while my mother laid out brochures for the local community college. She spoke in a hushed, gentle tone, as if breaking the news of a terminal illness. She told me that a university would be too much pressure for someone with my processing speed. She said I would be happier somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. She said it was for my own good. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that I understood concepts they could not even grasp, that my mind worked in three-dimensional structures and complex systems, even if I could not spell the words to describe them. But I said nothing. I took the brochures, I went to the community college, and while Julianne went off to a mid-tier private university that my mother marketed as an elite institution, I stayed home, working part-time and studying in the shadows. That was when I learned to hide. I learned that if I let them think I was slow, they stopped watching me. They stopped expecting things. And in that freedom, I flourished. I transferred to an online university program that allowed me to listen to lectures at double speed. I devised my own systems for learning. I graduated with honors. But I never told them. I told them I barely scraped by. When I got my master's degree, I told them I was taking a vocational course in data entry, and now, here I was, the director of operations for Apex Horizon, one of the largest logistics and infrastructure firms on the East Coast. My mind, the one they thought was broken, was the engine behind a supply chain that fed 3 states. I solved puzzles that made seasoned engineers weep. I could look at a failing distribution network and see the bottlenecks like glowing red lines on a map. I was ruthless, efficient, and highly compensated. But to Patricia and Julianne, I was Leona, the data entry clerk. I told them I worked in the basement of a warehouse, typing shipping codes into a legacy system for $18 an hour. I told them my boss was a tyrant named Mr. Henderson who docked my pay if I took too many bathroom breaks. They loved that story. It fit perfectly into the box they had built for me. It made them feel benevolent when they bought me dinner. It made Julianne feel superior when she complained about her vague, high-level corporate stress. My phone buzzed on the console, cutting through the silence of the car. The name on the display read, Mother. I took a deep breath, practicing the voice I used with them. A little higher, a little more hesitant. I tapped the screen. Hello, Mom, I said. Leona. Thank goodness. Patricia's voice filled the cabin, sharp and frantic. Where are you? You said you would be here by 4. There was traffic on the bridge. Mom, I said, I am about 20 minutes away. Well, you need to hurry, she snapped. The caterers messed up the vegetable prep for the crudités, and the roast needs to be basted every 15 minutes. I am running around like a headless chicken here. I frowned. Changing lanes? Is Julianne there? Can she not help you? There was a pause, a short, sharp intake of breath on the other end. Julianne is getting ready. Leona, you know she has to host tonight. She cannot have her hands smelling like onions and garlic. Besides, she just had her nails done this morning. A French tip. It is very delicate. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Of course, Julianne's hands were national treasures. My hands, on the other hand, were presumably made of sandpaper and servitude. Julianne was unemployed, though they did not know I knew that. She had all the time in the world, but the narrative had to be maintained. Julianne was the star. I was the stagehand. I understand. I said, keeping my voice level, I will drive faster. Good, Patricia said, her tone softening now that she had secured her labor force. And Leona, try to come in through the side door. The front hallway has just been waxed, and I do not want you tracking slush in with those boots of yours. I am wearing heels. Mom, I wanted to say, I am wearing Italian leather boots that cost more than your dishwasher, but I swallowed the words. Okay, Mom, side door. And one more thing, she added, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that always made my skin crawl. When you get here, do not mention your work too much tonight. We have the Millers coming, and their son just made partner at his firm. We do not want to bore them with stories about warehouse codes. Just nod and smile. Darling, it is what you are best at. She hung up before I could respond. The call disconnected, leaving me in the humming silence of the luxury car. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back had eyes like flint. I was a shark in a goldfish bowl, and they had no idea. They thought they were protecting me from my own incompetence, but I was the one protecting them. I was protecting them from the reality that the daughter they mocked was the only one in the family who actually knew how the world worked. I merged onto the off-ramp, the indicator clicking a steady rhythm. I would go in through the side door. I would chop the onions. I would baste the turkey while Julianne admired her French tips and practiced her lies. I would play the part of the slow, grateful daughter one last time, because tonight, the script was going to change. Tonight, the data entry clerk was bringing a performance review that no one was expecting. I pulled into the long driveway of my childhood home. The house was blazing with lights, a beacon of suburban perfection. A wreath the size of a tractor tire hung on the front door. It looked like a postcard. It looked like a trap. I parked my car near the garage, behind a hedge where it would not offend the aesthetic of the main entrance. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the dark. I reached into my designer handbag, pushing past the lip gloss and the car keys, until my fingers brushed the thick, textured paper of the envelope. The letterhead was embossed. The signature was real. Director of Operations. I am not slow. I whispered to the empty car. I checked my makeup in the visor mirror, ensuring the mask was firmly in place. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the biting cold, ready to be the disappointment they needed me to be. 72 hours before I found myself parking behind the hedge like a shameful secret. I was standing in a room that cost more to furnish than my parents' entire house. This was the war room at Apex Horizon, a glass-walled command center on the 45th floor overlooking the gray steel of the Chicago skyline. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of expensive espresso and fear. We were in the middle of a logistics meltdown. A routing algorithm for our Midwest perishable goods sector had collapsed overnight. 200 trucks carrying fresh produce were currently idling in loading bays across 3 states, and the spoilage clock was ticking. The engineers, men with PhDs from MIT and Stanford, were arguing over lines of code projected onto the massive wall screens. They were looking for a syntax error, a missing semicolon, a corrupted database entry. They were looking at the problem linearly, line by line, panic rising in their voices as the estimated loss counter ticked upward. I stood at the back of the room, silent. To them, I was just Leona from Strategy, the woman who usually handled long-term acquisitions. They did not know that while they saw code, I saw topography. My dyslexia, the very thing that had made reading The Cat in the Hat a torture session at age 7, had mutated into something else entirely in adulthood. I did not process information in sequences. I processed it in shapes. When I looked at the data streams on the screen, I did not see numbers. I saw a 3-dimensional landscape of flow and resistance. I could see the friction points glowing like heat maps in my mind. I walked to the whiteboard, picking up a black marker. The room did not quiet down immediately. It took a sharp clear of my throat to get their attention. "It is not the code," I said, my voice steady. "The code is executing perfectly. The problem is the physical geofencing data from the third-party vendor. Look here." I drew a crude map. I slashed a line through the distribution hub in Ohio. "The system thinks the bridge on Interstate 70 is closed because the vendor flagged it for maintenance in 2024. I explained, tapping the board. "The update never cleared. The trucks are not moving because the algorithm thinks there is literally no road there. It is waiting for a path that it thinks does not exist. Override the geofence manually." The lead engineer blinked, then typed furiously on his laptop. A moment later, the red lights on the main screen flickered and turned green. The fleet status changed from idle to en route. The room exhaled. A collective tension broke, replaced by the murmurs of relieved men saving their careers. That was my reality. I was not a slow reader. I was a hyper-visual thinker in a world designed for linear minds. I had spent 20 years thinking I was broken, only to realize I was just running a different operating system, one that happened to be faster, more intuitive, and infinitely more valuable than the standard model. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office, the adrenaline fading into a dull thrum. My workspace was minimalist, dominated by 3 monitors and a view that stretched to the lake. I minimized the logistics reports and opened a different window, one that I kept hidden under layers of security. It was a dossier on a company called Glitter Tech. This was Julianne's world. My sister's LinkedIn profile was a masterclass in corporate buzzwords without substance. Her title was listed as Chief Visionary Officer at Glitter Tech, a startup that claimed to be revolutionizing the way influencers monetize their digital footprint. If you read their mission statement, it sounded like they were saving the world. If you looked at their financials, which I had done, purely by accident, it looked like a pyramid scheme with better graphic design. I had stumbled upon it a month ago. Apex Horizon provided back-end server logistics for thousands of companies, and one day, while reviewing a list of delinquent accounts, a familiar name popped up: Glitter Tech. They were 90 days past due on their server hosting fees. The amount was not huge for us, maybe $50,000, but for a startup, it was a death rattle. I stared at the overdue invoice on my screen. I could have flagged it. I could have sent it to collections. A single email from me would have triggered a legal process that would have humiliated Julianne and exposed her company's insolvency. But I did not. I simply marked it for executive review, effectively freezing the collection process and buying her time she did not deserve. It was a strange form of power, holding my sister's career in the palm of my hand while she publicly mocked mine. Just that morning, my mother had called me, breathless with excitement. "Leona, you will never guess." Patricia had said, "Julianne is looking at estates in Greenwich. She says the bonus structure at Glitter Tech is so aggressive she might be able to pay cash by next year. Can you imagine a house with a gate?" I had gripped the phone, staring at the unpaid $50,000 invoice on my screen. "That sounds wonderful." "Mom," I had said, "she is thinking of getting a pool house just for guests." Patricia continued, "Maybe you can stay there sometime, if you help her with the gardening." The memory of that call made my teeth grind. The reality was that Julianne was not buying an estate. She was likely barely making rent on her current apartment. I knew for a fact she was using Mother's secondary credit card for her business lunches because I had seen the soft credit pulls when I monitored my parents' financial security, another task I did secretly to ensure they did not get scammed, even though they treated me like I could not count to 10. A knock on my doorframe interrupted my brooding. It was Marcus, the CEO of Apex Horizon. Marcus was a man in his 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my background, my family dynamic, and the lie I lived. He was the one who had hired me 5 years ago. Seeing past the community college transcript to the raw intelligence underneath, "You have a minute, Leona," he asked, stepping inside and closing the door. "For you always," I said, minimizing the Glitter Tech invoice. He sat in the chair opposite my desk, leaning back with a casual grace that belied the intensity of his visit. He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk between us. "The board voted this morning," he said. I looked at the paper. It was an internal memo, stamped confidential. The subject line read, "Restructuring of North American Leadership." "We are moving forward with the expansion," Marcus said, "and we need a director of operations who understands the system better than the people who built it." My heart hammered against my ribs. Director. This was it. This was the role that would put me in the top 1% of earners in the state. It came with a salary that would make my father's engineering pension look like pocket change. It came with stock options, a driver, and the power to shape the future of the company. Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice catching slightly. "I will not let you down. I know you will not," he said. "But there is a condition." I stiffened. "Condition?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression softening. "You have to stop hiding. Leona, you are going to be a public figure in this industry. Your name is going to be on press releases. You are going to be speaking at conferences. You cannot keep telling your family you are a data entry clerk. It does not fit the woman who is going to be running this division." I looked away. Toward the window, the gray sky pressed against the glass. "You know why I do it," I said quietly. "Because it is easier than making them face the truth," Marcus asked. "Because it keeps the peace, Leona. You are protecting their egos at the cost of your own dignity. You are the smartest person in this building, and you let them treat you like a child. They need the narrative." "Marcus," I said, "my mother needs Julianne to be the winner. If I win, the whole structure of our family collapses. I become the villain who humiliated the golden child. Maybe the structure needs to collapse." Marcus said gently, "Maybe it is the only way to build something real on the ashes." He tapped the paper. "Take the weekend," he said. "Go home for Christmas. Look them in the eye. And ask yourself if they deserve the version of you that you give them, or if they deserve the truth." He stood up and left the paper on my desk. I sat there for a long time, staring at the word director. It looked heavy. It looked dangerous. I thought about the invoice from Glittertech. I thought about the imaginary estate in Greenwich. I thought about the rental car I had booked for the trip home, a generic sedan because my actual car, a vintage Porsche restoration project I had finished last summer, was too flashy, too loud, too successful. I realized then that I was living two completely parallel lives. In one lane, I was a titan of industry, a woman who moved goods across a continent with the power of her mind. In the other lane, I was Leona the slow, Leona the burden, Leona who needed help reading a menu. These lanes were about to merge, and the crash was going to be spectacular. I picked up the memo and folded it carefully, slipping it into my purse. I would not tell them, not yet. I would go home. I would play the role, and I would wait. I would wait for Julianne to make her move, for Mother to make her comparison. And when the moment was right, when the condescension reached its peak, I would not just correct them, I would dismantle them. I closed my laptop, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the office. The elevator ride down took 40 seconds. In that time, I composed my face, softening the sharp angles of authority, widening my eyes to look a little more vacant, a little more unsure. By the time the doors opened to the lobby, the director was gone. Leona, the disappointment, was ready for her holiday visit. The invitation arrived via email, formatted with an excessive amount of gold leaf graphics and a font that looked like it was trying to mimic royal calligraphy. The subject line read, "A celebration of excellence, Julianne's journey to Forbes." I stared at the screen of my company-issued laptop. Forbes, my sister, who had once asked me if the sun revolved around the earth or the other way around during a drunken brunch, was apparently being honored as one of the 30 under 30 visionaries. Or at least, that was the story my mother was spinning. The email detailed a gala dinner at the house, a lifetime achievement celebration for a 29-year-old. The audacity was almost impressive. Beneath the glowing description of Julianne's groundbreaking work in digital synergy, whatever that meant, was a second, smaller attachment addressed specifically to me. It was titled simply Leona's To-Do List. I opened it. It was a spreadsheet. Pick up 100 pounds of artisanal ice cubed, not crushed. Vacuum the guest wing curtains, the maid is busy with the silver. Manage the valet parking flow stand outside and direct cars. Buy the specific triple-ply lavender-scented napkins Julianne likes. Do not buy the generic brand again. I let out a short, dry laugh. In my other window, I was currently overseeing a live crisis simulation for a global shipping lane disruption involving 3 continents. I had 40 engineers awaiting my command on a secure channel. Yet, in the Whitestone universe, my primary utility was buying napkins and standing in the cold to park cars for people who would not even remember my name. The dichotomy of my life had never been sharper. That morning at Apex Horizon, we had faced a catastrophic server failure in our Singapore hub. A cyber attack had targeted the automated cranes at the port, threatening to freeze billions of dollars in inventory. The room had descended into chaos. Senior analysts were shouting, projecting losses in the tens of millions within the first hour. I had stepped into the fray. I did not shout. I did not panic. I looked at the cascading code on the main monitor, the red lines of the virus spreading like spilled ink. My dyslexia kicked in, stripping away the noise, revealing the pattern. The virus wasn't attacking the cranes directly. It was looping through the temperature control sensors. Isolate the thermal grid. I had ordered, my voice cutting through the noise. Cut the hard line to the sensors. But that will blind the system, an engineer had argued. Do it, I said, or we lose the whole port. They did it. The red line stopped. The cranes rebooted. We saved the company an estimated $12 million in 90 minutes. Marcus had come down from his office, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said in front of the entire floor, "You have the finest strategic mind I have ever seen." 12 hours later, I was standing in the aisle of a grocery store, staring at napkins. Leona. My mother's voice barked from my phone, which was wedged between my shoulder and ear. I am here. Mom, I said, grabbing a pack of lavender napkins. Did you get the ice? And please tell me you did not get the bags with the holes in them. Last time, the patio was a swimming pool. I am getting the ice next, I said. And Mom, about the parking. Oh, do not start. Leona, she interrupted. We need someone responsible out there. You know how Uncle Robert parks. He will block the whole driveway if you are not watching him. Besides, it gives you something to do where you do not have to interact too much. You know how overwhelmed you get with big crowds. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed. I had just coordinated a defense against a digital siege. Fine, I said. I will do the parking. Good. And wear something warm. But not that puffy coat you have. It looks like a sleeping bag. Wear the wool one. It is slimmer. She hung up. I tossed the napkins into the cart with a little more force than necessary. My phone rang again almost immediately. This time, the caller ID showed a picture of Julianne pouting at the camera, a filter smoothing her skin to porcelain. What is it? Julianne, I answered. Don't use that tone with me. Leona, she snapped. I am stressed out of my mind. Do you know how hard it is to coordinate a press release? I imagined the press release was just her posting a selfie on Instagram with the hashtag #BossBabe. I am sure it is grueling, I said flatly. Look, I have a small hiccup, she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing its imperious edge and sliding into something greasier. My bank flagged my cards for fraud, probably because I am making so many big transactions for the party. The systems are so sensitive when you are moving real money around. Right, I said, real money. So I need a favor. I need cash, just for the caterer's deposit. They are being so old-fashioned, demanding cash on delivery. How much, I asked. $2,000? I paused. $2,000 was not a small amount, even for me. For Julianne, whose company was currently dodging my company's billing department. It was astronomical. I can transfer it. I said, no, she shrieked, then lowered her voice. No transfers. The bank accounts are frozen. Remember, I need cash. Bring it when you come. I will pay you back on Monday when the fraud alert clears. I stood there in the frozen food aisle, the cold air from the freezers washing over me. I knew exactly what was happening. There was no fraud alert. Her cards were maxed out. She was broke, terrified, and trying to keep the charade alive for one more weekend. I will bring it, I said. You are a lifesaver, she said, her relief palpable. Though honestly, you should be grateful. If I make this Forbes list, think of the connections I can make for you. Maybe I can find you a job that doesn't involve typing. She laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. I will bring the money, Julianne, I said, but I want you to sign for it. Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Excuse me, a promissory note, I said calmly. Simple IOU, just for my records. You know how I am. I like to keep things simple. Since I am slow. Are you joking? She hissed. You are asking me, your sister, the future CEO of a tech unicorn, to sign a slip of paper for a measly $2,000. It is that or no cash, I said, and the caterer leaves. There was a long pause. I could hear her teeth grinding. "Fine," she spat. "Bring the stupid paper, but do not let Mom see it. She will think you are being petty. See you tomorrow. Julianne." I hung up. A grim satisfaction settled in my chest. I finished my shopping, buying the expensive ice, the specific napkins, and a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to be. When I got back to my apartment, my real apartment, the penthouse I had bought 3 months ago under an LLC to keep my name off the public records, there was a large envelope waiting on my kitchen island. It had been delivered by courier. I opened it. Inside was the official contract. Position Director of Operations, North America. Base salary, $350,000. Signing bonus, $50,000. Stock options, vesting immediately. I ran my fingers over the raised seal of Apex Horizon. It was heavy. It was real. This piece of paper was worth more than Julianne's entire fictional career. It was validation. It was the undeniable proof that my brain, the one they called broken, was a weapon of mass efficiency. I looked at the to-do list email from my mother still open on my laptop. Manage the valet parking flow. I looked at the contract. A plan began to form in my mind. A cold, precise, strategic plan. I would not wrap a gift for Julianne. I would not buy her a spa voucher or a designer scarf. I picked up the contract. I folded it neatly. I found a thick, cream-colored envelope, the kind used for wedding invitations or legal summons. I slid the contract inside. I would bring the cash for Julianne. I would let her sign the debt note. I would park the cars. I would stand in the cold. I would let them fire their last volley of insults. And then, when the moment was perfect, when the toast was made and the lies were thickest in the air, I would deliver my gift. I placed the envelope in my purse next to the stack of $100 bills. "Happy birthday, Julianne," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope you like surprises." The morning before the party, the city was buried under a gray blanket of slush. But inside my office, the atmosphere was clinically precise. Before I could officially assume the title of Director of Operations, there was one final administrative hurdle to clear: the corporate security audit. Apex Horizon handled government contracts, which meant every executive needed a clearance level that bordered on invasive. I had to submit a full financial disclosure, verifying every asset, every liability, and every credit line attached to my Social Security number. I sat with my personal laptop open, ready to download my credit reports from the 3 major bureaus. I was not worried. My financial life was a fortress of solitude. I paid my bills in full every month. I had 0 consumer debt. My investments were diversified and conservative. I clicked the button to generate the report, expecting the usual clean slate. The screen refreshed. I scanned the summary. Mortgage on the penthouse current. Student loans paid in full. Auto lease none. And then, my eyes stopped on a line item near the bottom. Credit One Bank Platinum Rewards. Balance $48,620. Status past due. Authorized user Julianne Whitestone. I blinked. I did not blink in surprise. I blinked in a cold, biological reset of my vision, hoping the pixels would rearrange themselves. They did not. The account had been opened 14 months ago. I clicked on the details. The billing address was my parents' house in Connecticut. The primary account holder was me. The co-signer was my mother, Patricia, and the card holder, the one racking up nearly $50,000 in luxury dining, boutique hotels, and designer clothing, was my sister. They had used my Social Security number. They had forged my signature. A low humming noise started in my ears, the sound of blood rushing too fast through narrow veins. This was not just a betrayal. This was a felony. Identity theft. Wire fraud. In the eyes of the law. I was responsible for nearly $50,000 of debt that my sister had worn, eaten, and drank. I did not scream. I did not throw my coffee mug against the wall. Instead, the icy calm that made me a terrifying negotiator in the boardroom descended over me. I picked up my phone and dialed a number, but not to my mother. I called a private investigator I used for vetting sensitive corporate hires. His name was Vance, and he owed me a favor for helping him navigate a tax audit last year. Vance, I said when he answered, I need a deep dive. Financial and employment. The subject is Julianne Whitestone. I need to know her current employment status, her liquidity, and any recent large asset transfers involving Patricia Whitestone. I need it in 2 hours. I can do that, Vance said, his voice gravelly. You want the soft touch or the hard pull? Burn it down, I said. Find everything, while I waited. I turned my attention back to the credit report. I drilled down into the transaction history. The spending was manic. A $2,000 dinner at Nobu, a weekend stay at the Plaza, a $4,000 charge at a med spa for aesthetic maintenance. It was a catalog of a life Julianne could not afford. Financed by the credit rating I had quietly built while she laughed at my thriftiness. 2 hours later, my secure email pinged. Vance had sent a dossier. I opened the first PDF. Employment verification. Subject Julianne Whitestone. Employer Glittertech. Status terminated for cause. Date of separation, October 15th. She had been fired 3 months ago. I read the notes attached to the file. The termination was not a simple layoff. It was for falsification of performance metrics and misappropriation of expense accounts. Julianne had been caught inventing numbers to make her department look profitable. And when that was not enough, she had started charging personal expenses to the company card. Glittertech had let her go quietly to avoid a scandal, but she was blacklisted in the tech sector. She had been unemployed for 90 days. The busy schedule, the big meetings, the promotion to Forbes. It was all smoke. I opened the second file. Asset transfers. This was where my stomach truly turned. It showed a series of wire transfers into Julianne's personal checking account. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. The source was a joint account held by my parents. But the money entering that joint account was coming from a local estate jeweler and an auction house. My mother was selling her jewelry. I looked at the dates. A week ago, a deposit for $8,000 from Gold Gem Exchange, that same day. An $8,000 transfer to Julianne. Patricia knew. My mother knew Julianne was drowning. She knew her golden child was a fraud who had been fired for lying, and instead of forcing Julianne to face reality, Patricia was selling her own diamonds, probably the vintage pieces my grandmother had left her to keep the illusion alive. She was cannibalizing the family's future to polish a statue that had already crumbled. And I was the backup generator. The credit card in my name was the safety net they had rigged without my consent, just in case the jewelry money ran out. They thought I was too stupid to check my credit report. They thought slow Leona would never notice a $50,000 anchor tied to her ankle. I printed every page. My hands were steady, but my fingertips felt numb. I needed legal insulation. I picked up my phone again and called my personal attorney. A woman named Sarah who specialized in asset protection. Sarah, I said, I have a situation. I need to sever all financial ties with my family immediately. I need an affidavit of forgery prepared for a credit account, and I need a cease and desist drafted. But I'm not filing them yet. I just want them ready. Consider it done. Sarah said, Is there anything else? Yes, I said. I need you to check public filings for any new business entities formed under the name Julianne Whitestone in the last month. Hold on. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. Here it is. Sarah said, The Visionary Circle, LLC. Registered 2 weeks ago. It is listed as a private equity consultation firm. Who are the officers, I asked. Julianne Whitestone is the CEO. Sarah read, and, wait, there is a chief compliance officer listed. Who is it? You, Leona Whitestone. The air left the room. I am not a compliance officer, I whispered. I never signed anything. Sarah's voice went sharp. Leona, this entity is structured to solicit private investment. The filing documents claim the company has managed assets of $5 million, which we know is false. If she takes money from investors and the company folds, the compliance officer is the one who goes to jail for negligence. She has set you up as the fall guy. It was the masterstroke of their cruelty. Julianne was planning to use the party the celebration of excellence to launch this fund. She was going to ask our wealthy relatives, the uncles and cousins, to invest in her next big thing. It was a Ponzi scheme in the making, designed to pay off her debts under the guise of investment. And when the money vanished, as it inevitably would, the paperwork would show that Leona, the dumb sister, was the one responsible for compliance. Julianne would claim she was just the visionary, and that her slow sister had mishandled the regulatory side. They were not just mocking me anymore. They were framing me. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window of my penthouse, looking out at the city I had conquered. The snow was falling harder now, swirling in the wind. For years, I had wondered if my mother loved me. I had wondered if, beneath the criticism and the neglect, there was a kernel of maternal instinct. Now I had my answer. She loved the image of her family more than she loved the people in it. She was willing to let me take the fall for a crime I did not commit, just to keep Julianne from having to admit she failed. I went to my safe. I took out a fresh file folder. I placed the credit report inside. I placed the employment termination record inside. I placed the bank transfer records showing the jewelry sales inside. And finally, I placed the registration documents for the Visionary Circle, LLC. I closed the folder. It was thick. It was heavy. I was not just bringing a promotion letter to dinner tomorrow. I was bringing an indictment. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Julianne. "Hey sis, can't wait for tomorrow. Make sure you dress nice. Okay, I have a surprise announcement and I want the whole family to look successful. Love you." I stared at the words. "Love you," I typed back. "I will be there. Don't worry. I have everything under control." I put the phone down. The investigation was over. The trial was set, and the executioner was wearing a charcoal blazer and a smile that did not reach her eyes. The transformation began not with a grand announcement, but with the quiet snip of scissors through silk thread. I stood in the center of a private fitting room in downtown Chicago, surrounded by mirrors that reflected a woman I had kept hidden for too long. For the past decade, my wardrobe for family visits had been a carefully curated collection of the nondescript, ill-fitting cardigans, scuffed ballet flats, and dresses that hung loosely on my frame, designed to make me look smaller, softer, and less significant. I had dressed to disappear. I had dressed to avoid triggering my sister's insecurity or my mother's criticism. But today, I was shopping for Leona the director. The tailor, an elderly Italian man named Stefano, who had dressed half the Fortune 500 CEOs in the city, adjusted the hem of the trousers. The suit was bespoke, a charcoal gray wool blend imported from Milan. It was not flashy. It did not sparkle like the cheap sequins Julianne favored. Instead, it absorbed the light and held it. The jacket was cut sharp at the waist, emphasizing a silhouette of strength. The lapels were narrow and modern. When I buttoned it, I felt like I was sealing myself inside a tank. "It is perfect, Signora," Stefano said, standing back. "It commands the room without shouting. That is exactly what I need." "Stefano," I said, "I paid the bill $4,000 with my own black card, not flinching at the total. I bought a silk blouse and a deep, blood-red burgundy to wear underneath, a subtle splash of aggression against the gray. I bought stilettos that added 3 inches to my height and made a sound like a gavel striking wood when I walked across the marble floor. As I left the boutique, carrying the garment bag like a weapon case, I ran into a ghost from my past. Leona Whitestone. I turned. Standing near the entrance of the coffee shop next door was Arthur Sterling. He was a retired judge who had lived down the street from us when I was a child. He was one of the few adults who had never spoken to me in that slow, pitying voice. He had once caught me reading a complex engineering manual in the backyard, struggling with the words, but understanding the diagrams perfectly, and had told me I had the mind of an architect. "Hello, Judge Sterling," I said, shifting the garment bag to my other hand. He looked me up and down, his eyebrows raising slightly. He took in the designer bag, the confident posture, the cold clarity in my eyes. He did not see the slow Leona. He saw the woman I actually was. "You look formidable," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I hardly recognized you. Your mother told me you were working in data entry. She made it sound like you were barely scraping by." I offered a tight, polite smile. My mother has a very specific way of telling stories. "Judge, but I am doing well. Actually, I am doing very well." He nodded slowly, his judicial instincts kicking in. "I can see that. You carry yourself like someone who has just won a very difficult case. I am about to—" I said, "Actually, Judge, are you coming to Julianne's party tomorrow night? The celebration of excellence?" He sighed. Checking his watch, I was planning to skip it. Patricia's parties tend to be theatrical, and I'm not sure I can sit through another speech about Julianne's brilliance without a stiff drink. "Please come," I said, stepping closer. "I would take it as a personal favor. I think there might be a moment tomorrow night that requires an impartial witness. Someone who appreciates the truth." He looked at me for a long moment, reading the subtext in my voice. The curiosity in his eyes sharpened. "An impartial witness," he repeated. "That sounds ominous." "Leona, it will be illuminating." I corrected. "Please." "All right," he said. "For you. I will be there." I watched him walk away, feeling a surge of strategic satisfaction. Arthur Sterling was respected in our community. If he saw what was about to happen, his word would carry weight. He would prevent my mother from spinning the narrative later. He would confirm the kill. I drove back to the Apex Horizon Tower for one final task. The office was quiet, the Friday afternoon lull settling in before the weekend. I walked to my desk and pulled a specific vendor file from the stack I had flagged earlier in the week. The vendor was a company called Vector Stream Services. They supplied low-level IT cabling and server maintenance for our off-site storage units. They were also consistently overbilling us by 15% and delivering subpar equipment. I had looked into the ownership structure of Vector Stream Services 2 days ago. It was registered to a residential address in New Jersey. The principal owner was a man named Kyle Davis. Kyle Davis was Julianne's boyfriend, the one she claimed was an investment banker. In reality, Kyle was running a shell company that was leeching money from Apex Horizon, likely because Julianne had fed him the contract details. Thinking no one in the massive corporation would notice a few $1,000s here and there, they were using my workplace, my domain, to fund their lifestyle. I picked up my pen. I did not call legal. I did not call Kyle. I simply took the termination order, which revoked their contract effective immediately due to performance breach, and signed my name at the bottom, Leona Whitestone, Director of Operations. I scanned the document and hit send. By Monday morning, Kyle's primary source of income would vanish. By Monday afternoon, he would be calling Julianne in a panic, but by then, the party would be over, and they would have bigger problems than a canceled cable contract. I was not just cutting off their funding, I was setting fire to the bridge they were standing on. My phone buzzed. It was Patricia. I let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speaker as I packed up my briefcase. "Hello? Mother? Leona? I am just finalizing the seating chart for tomorrow," Patricia said, her voice tight with the stress of micromanagement. "We have more RSVPs than I expected. The Forbes announcement has really drawn a crowd." "That is nice," I said, closing my laptop. "Yes, well, it creates a problem." She continued. "The main dining table only seats 12 comfortably. We have the senator coming, and the Millers. And of course Julianne and her investors." I waited, knowing exactly what was coming. "So, I have set up a smaller table in the sunroom," she said. "It is charming, really. It will be you, the cousins' kids, and maybe Aunt Donna's nurse. It will be quieter there. You will not have to worry about following the conversation at the big table. You know how fast the talk gets when clever people start drinking wine. The sunroom, the kids' table." She was banishing me to the periphery, physically segregating me from the clever people, so I would not embarrass her with my presence. "That sounds fine, Mother," I said. "Oh, good," she exhaled. "I knew you would understand. You are always so agreeable. Leona, it is your best quality. Just try not to spill anything on the tablecloth. All right? It is vintage linen. I picked up the heavy, cream-colored envelope containing my promotion letter. I ran my thumb over the edge of the paper. Mom, I asked. Yes, do not worry about the seating chart, I said, my voice dropping to a register she had never heard from me before. I will find my own spot. What does that mean? She asked, sounding annoyed. It means, I said, staring at my reflection in the darkened office window, that I will sit where I deserve. She laughed. A short, dismissive sound. You are being weird again. Leona, just arrive by 4 to park the cars. The line went dead. I put the phone in my pocket. I did not feel the usual sting of rejection. That part of me had cauterized. Instead, I felt a cold, hard clarity. I spent the next hour doing something that felt almost ceremonial. I took the framed certificate of my promotion, the one I had planned to hang in my office, and wrapped it in brown butcher paper. It looked unassuming, like a cheap painting or a generic store-bought gift. This would be my offering to the altar of Julianne's ego. Then, I opened my safe one last time. I took out the black binder containing the credit report, the fraud evidence, the termination letter for Kyle's company, and the proof of the Ponzi scheme registration. I did not wrap this one. I slipped it into my leather briefcase. I drove back to my penthouse as the sun began to set. The city lights of Chicago flickered on. A sprawling grid of electricity and ambition. I stood on my balcony, the wind whipping my hair, looking down at the millions of lives moving below. For 29 years, I had viewed my family through a lens of hope. I had hoped they would see me. I had hoped they would love me for who I was, not who they needed me to be. I had swallowed their insults like medicine, believing that if I was just patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough, they would eventually realize their mistake. But standing there, high above the world, I realized that hope was a liability. Hope was what kept the victim returning to the abuser. Hope was the lie that said things would get better without action. I felt the last drop of pity for them evaporate. It was replaced by something cleaner. Justice. They wanted a show. They wanted a celebration of success. They wanted to marvel at how far a Whitestone could rise. Tomorrow, I would give them exactly what they wanted. I went back inside and laid the charcoal suit on my bed, smoothing the fabric. Next to it, I placed the brown-wrapped package in the black briefcase. The weapons were ready. The soldier was ready. I turned off the lights and went to sleep, enjoying the most peaceful rest I had known in years. The engine of my Porsche 911 Targa purred into silence as I pulled up to the curb. 3 houses down from my parents' driveway. I sat for a moment in the low leather seat, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. This car was my pride, a machine of precision engineering that I had bought with a quarterly bonus 2 years ago and kept in a private garage in the city. Bringing it here was a risk, a deviation from the poverty script I had followed for a decade. But tonight was not about following scripts. It was about burning the theater down. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. The bespoke charcoal suit I had purchased yesterday fit like a second skin, the sharp tailoring emphasizing the strength of my shoulders. Beneath it, the blood-red silk blouse offered a flash of dangerous color. I looked nothing like Leona the data entry clerk. I looked like Leona the director, the woman who could shut down a supply chain with a single phone call. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive leather and cold winter air, and stepped out into the night. The walk to the house was short, the snow crunching beneath my stilettos. My parents' home was ablaze with light, every window glowing like a lantern. From the sidewalk, I could hear the murmur of voices and the clinking of glass. The sounds of a party in full swing. It was a performance, a stage set designed to convince the neighborhood and perhaps themselves that the Whitestones were thriving, that their golden child was ascending to the heavens of finance. I adjusted my cuffs, gripped the handle of my briefcase, and walked up the driveway. I entered through the front door, ignoring my mother's previous instruction to use the side entrance. The hallway was warm and smelled of cinnamon, pine, and the cloying sweetness of expensive perfume. My arrival went unnoticed at first. The foyer was crowded with coats and guests. A sea of black ties and cocktail dresses. I moved through them like a shark gliding through a reef, my eyes scanning the room. In the center of the living room, Julianne was holding court. She was wearing a gold-sequined dress that caught every photon of light in the room, shimmering with a desperate kind of brilliance. Her hair was piled high in an elaborate updo, and she held a champagne flute as if it were a scepter. Surrounding her were my uncles, cousins, and a few neighbors, their faces upturned in rapt attention. I have always said that vision is the only currency that matters in the 21st century, Julianne was saying, her voice loud and practiced. When I built the framework for Glitter Tech, everyone said I was dreaming too big. But that is the thing about disruption. It scares people who are used to the status quo. My new venture, the Visionary Circle, is going to leverage high-frequency algorithmic trading strategies to democratize wealth. We are talking about triple-digit returns in the first quarter. I stopped near the doorway, listening. It was a word salad, a meaningless jumble of financial terms she had likely memorized from a podcast. High-frequency trading required infrastructure she did not have, and capital she definitely did not possess. But the guests were nodding. They were mesmerized by the sequins and the confidence. They wanted to believe that the girl they had watched grow up was a genius. Then, my mother saw me. Patricia was weaving through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her smile fixed and rigid. Her eyes landed on me, and the smile faltered. She stopped dead, her gaze raking over my Italian suit, the silk blouse, the assertive height of my heels. For a second, I saw genuine confusion in her eyes, followed immediately by a flicker of fear. I did not look like the daughter she knew. I did not look like the foil she needed. "Leona," she hissed, closing the distance between us with remarkable speed. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm and resonant. "What on earth are you wearing?" she whispered furiously, pulling me slightly toward the wall. "You look severe. You look like you are going to a court hearing, not a family party. And why are you so late? I told you 4 o'clock. The valet company sent a boy who looks like he is 12. I needed you out there. I was detained." I said simply, "Well, never mind that now," she said, thrusting the silver tray toward me. It was heavy, piled high with crab puffs. "Take this. Go to the kitchen and put on an apron, the white one with the lace trim. You can circulate with the appetizers. And for heaven's sake, try to smile. You look like an undertaker." I looked at the tray. Then I looked at her. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us, small but heavy as a stone. Patricia blinked. "Excuse me," I said. "No." "Mother," I repeated, keeping my hands firmly at my sides. "I am not working tonight. I am a guest." Her mouth opened and closed. She looked around to see if anyone had heard. This was a deviation. This was the furniture talking back. "You are a guest," she scoffed, her voice low and venomous. "Leona, do not be ridiculous. You cannot afford to be a guest. These crab puffs cost more than you make in a week. Now take the tray and make yourself useful before you embarrass me." I stepped back, physically removing myself from her reach. "I suggest you hire a server if you need help." I said, "I am going to get a drink." I walked past her, leaving her standing there with the tray of crab puffs, her face a mask of shock. I could feel her eyes boring into my back. But I did not turn around. I walked straight to the bar, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and turned to face the room. That was when the jackals descended. My Aunt Donna, a woman who measured human worth by the square footage of their homes, drifted over. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay and wearing a look of predatory curiosity. "Leona," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "We did not think you were coming. Your mother said you might be picking up an extra shift at the warehouse." I took a sip of water. I cleared my schedule. "Aunt Donna, that is nice," she said, eyeing my suit with suspicion. "Is that wool? It looks expensive. Did you find it at an outlet sale? You know, you really have to be careful with credit cards." "Dear, I saw a report on the news about young people getting into terrible debt trying to look professional. It is bespoke." I said. She paused. not understanding or perhaps choosing not to hear. Well, it is very structured, she said, wrinkling her nose. You know, Julianne's dress is a Vera Wang, custom, but of course, Julianne has always had that flair for high fashion. So, are you still doing that data entry thing, inputting numbers? I am in operations. I said, oh, operations. She chuckled, waving her hand dismissively. That is a fancy word for typing, isn't it? My neighbor's son does that. He says it is very repetitive, but I suppose it is low stress. Not everyone is cut out for the kind of pressure Julianne handles. Did you hear she is launching a hedge fund? I did hear. I said, my eyes drifting to where Julianne was now laughing loudly at a joke made by a wealthy uncle. It sounds very ambitious. Ambitious is the word. Donna agreed. We are all thinking of putting a little money in to support family. Of course. And the returns she is promising are just incredible. 20% in a month. Can you imagine? I tightened my grip on my glass. 20% a month was not investing. It was theft. It was the mathematical signature of a scam. I would be careful with that. Aunt Donna. I said quietly, high returns usually mean high risk, or worse. Donna laughed, patting my arm with a condescending pity. Oh, Leona, you always were so timid. That is why you are where you are. And Julianne is where she is. You have to spend money to make money. Dear, you wouldn't understand. She drifted away, dismissing me as a financial illiterate. I watched her go, knowing that in less than an hour, she would be begging me for advice on how to recover her lost funds. Leona. The voice came from behind me. It was Julianne. I turned. My sister was standing close, too close, up close. The glamour faded slightly. I could see the tightness around her eyes. The way her makeup was caked a little too thickly to hide the stress lines. She smelled of vodka and desperation. Hello? Julianne? I said. Congratulations on the Forbes list. She narrowed her eyes, scanning my face for sarcasm. Finding none, she smirked. Thanks. It is a big deal. But listen, we need to talk. She steered me toward a quiet corner near the grand piano, away from the main cluster of guests. Once we were secluded, her smile vanished. Did you bring the cash? She asked, her voice a harsh whisper. I nodded. It is in my bag. $2,000. Good, she said, extending her hand. Give it to me. The caterer is threatening to pack up the dessert station if I do not pay him in 10 minutes. I did not move. The signature, Julianne. I said, I have the promissory note right here. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a simple legal document stating she owed me $2,000, payable within 30 days. She stared at it like it was a dead rat. You are actually serious, she hissed. You are embarrassing me over pocket change. It is not pocket change to me. I lied smoothly. And business is business. Sign it, and you get the cash. She snatched the paper and the pen I offered. She scribbled her name furiously, tearing the paper slightly with the force of the pen tip. There, she spat, shoving it back at me. Happy now, give me the money. I handed her the envelope containing the cash. She checked the contents, counting the bills with trembling fingers. Once satisfied, she shoved the envelope into her clutch and looked at me with a renewed sense of superiority. You know, she said, stepping closer, looming over me in her heels, I have another document for you to sign later. For the visionary circle, I need a compliance officer on paper. It is just a formality. Mom said you would do it. I looked at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was not just asking me to join her company. She was asking me to be the designated scapegoat for when the SEC came knocking. I do not think so. Julianne, I said. She laughed. A low, cruel sound. Oh, you will sign it, because if you do not, I will tell everyone here exactly why you are really still single. I will tell them about that little incident in college you worked so hard to hide. I will make up stories that will make you the laughingstock of this town for the next decade. Do not test me, Leona. I am the star here. You are just the background noise. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was terrified. She was a cornered animal biting at the only thing she thought was weaker than herself. I carefully folded the promissory note and put it back in my pocket. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal suit. "You are right, Julianne," I said softly. "You are the star. I am glad you know your place." She sneered. I smiled then. It was not the shy, apologetic smile she was used to. It was the smile of a predator who has just heard the trap snap shut. "I do know my place," I said, "and I have a special gift for you to celebrate it." She rolled her eyes. "If it is another book or a gift card, just leave it on the table." "Oh, no," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that made the hair on her arms stand up. "This gift is one of a kind, but you have to wait. Wait for what she demanded." I leaned in, my lips inches from her ear. "Wait for the cake, sister." I pulled back, leaving her standing there with a confused, uneasy expression on her face. I turned and walked back into the crowd, scanning the room for Judge Sterling. I saw him near the fireplace, nursing a scotch, watching the room with a cynical eye. He caught my gaze and nodded imperceptibly. The witness was ready. The evidence was in my bag. The fraudulent signature was in my pocket. I checked my watch. Dinner would be served in 20 minutes. The speeches would start in 40. The countdown had begun. The dinner chimes rang, a soft, melodic sound that summoned the guests to the dining room like a herd of well-dressed cattle. My mother had outdone herself with the table setting. It was a landscape of crystal goblets, silver chargers, and floral arrangements so large they effectively blocked cross-table conversation. I walked into the room, ignoring the place card with my name that had been relegated to a small folding table in the corner near the kitchen door, the kids' table she had threatened me with. Instead, I pulled out a heavy oak chair at the far end of the main table, directly opposite my father and to the left of Judge Sterling. Patricia's eyes widened as she saw me sit. She made a sharp, abortive gesture with her hand, a silent command to move. I simply unfolded my linen napkin, placed it across my lap, and poured myself a glass of the vintage Cabernet she had opened for the important guests. My Aunt Donna gasped slightly, but the presence of the senator and Judge Sterling kept my mother from making a scene. She forced a tight smile, signaling the servers to begin. The first course was a lobster bisque, rich and cloying, as spoons clinked against china. Julianne stood up. She tapped her glass with a fork, the sharp ting-ting-ting silencing the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice pitching into that polished, theatrical register she reserved for audiences. "Tonight is not just about me, it is about vision. When I look around this room, I see the past and the future." She paused for effect, sweeping her gaze over the guests. "My new venture, the Visionary Circle, is about disrupting the traditional paradigms of wealth." She continued, "We are leveraging blockchain synergy to create a decentralized liquidity pool that operates on a hyper-local level. Essentially, we are using quantum-adjacent algorithms to predict market volatility before it happens. It is not just investment, it is financial precognition." I took a slow sip of wine to hide the twitch in my lip. Quantum-adjacent algorithms. It was a string of words that meant absolutely nothing. She was stringing together terminology she had likely read in the headlines of a tech magazine without understanding the underlying mechanics. The guests, however, were nodding. My father looked confused but proud. Aunt Donna looked ready to hand over her checkbook. "It sounds fascinating." "Julianne," the senator said, wiping his mouth. "So you are bypassing traditional brokerage fees entirely?" "Exactly." Julianne beamed. "We are cutting out the middleman. We are shorting the institutional latency to maximize yield for the individual investor. We are projecting returns of 15 to 20% per month." The room murmured with appreciation. 20% a month. To anyone with a basic understanding of economics, that number screamed, Ponzi scheme. To my family, it sounded like magic. I set my wine glass down. The sound was soft, but in the hush of admiration, it was audible. "Julianne," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. The table turned to me. Julianne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reassembling into a mask of patient annoyance. Yes, Leona. I was wondering about the risk management protocols, I said, keeping my tone curious but laced with technical precision. If you are shorting institutional latency, that implies you are engaging in high-frequency trading. What is your exposure to slippage during market spikes? And are you using a dark pool for execution to prevent front-running? Or are you routing directly to the exchange? Silence descended on the table. It was heavy and absolute. Julianne blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She did not know what slippage was. She definitely did not know what a dark pool was. I had asked a question that required a director-level understanding of market mechanics, and she was drowning in it. Well, she stammered, shifting her weight. The algorithm handles the technicalities. Leona, it is proprietary, but the compliance structure. I pressed, leaning forward slightly. If you are soliciting private capital for high-frequency derivatives, you must be registered as a commodity pool operator under the CFTC regulations. Have you filed your Form 7R yet? Because if you have not, offering these returns is a federal offense. The color drained from her face. Patricia slammed her hand down on the table. It was not a violent slam, but it was enough to rattle the silverware. Oh, for heaven's sake! Leona, she exclaimed, her laugh high and brittle. Stop trying to sound smart. It gives you a headache. She turned to the guests, rolling her eyes. You have to forgive my youngest, she said, her voice dripping with affectionate condescension. She reads these articles online and thinks she understands the big words. Leona, honey, leave the business talk to the people who actually have degrees in it. You are confusing everyone with your nonsense. The tension in the room broke instantly. The guests laughed. It was a relief for them. They did not understand my question either, so dismissing it as the ramblings of the dumb sister made them feel intelligent again. Yeah, Leona. Uncle Robert chuckled, pointing a fork at me. Remember when you tried to explain how the microwave worked and you got it backward? Stick to, what is it you do? Typing. Julianne let out a breath she had been holding, her confidence flooding back as the spotlight returned to her favored narrative. It is okay. Mom, Julianne said, smiling at me with pity. Leona just wants to feel involved. It is cute. Actually, she is trying. She looked at me, tilting her head. Leona, I know all this finance stuff is over your head, and that is fine. We all have different strengths. You are good at organizing things. But seriously, if you are worried about money, you should let me help you. I know you have that little savings account you have been hoarding from your data entry job. She paused, looking around the table to ensure everyone was listening to her benevolence. Why do not you give it to me to manage, she offered. I can get you into the founder's tier. I can turn that $5,000 or whatever you have into $10,000 in a few months. Consider it a gift. I want you to have a safety net, since, well, you know, she let the sentence hang. The implication clear, since you are too incompetent to survive on your own. The table cooed. How generous, Aunt Donna whispered. What a good sister. I sat there, feeling the cold weight of the dossier in my bag under the table. The irony was so sharp it almost tasted like blood in my mouth. She was offering to steal my money and calling it charity. She was offering to bankrupt me to hide her own insolvency. I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the red liquid. I looked at Julianne. I did not look angry. I looked at her the way a scientist looks at a bacteria culture in a petri dish. That is a very interesting offer. Julianne, I said softly, I will definitely keep it in mind. You should, she said, smugly taking a sip of her champagne. You really should. The conversation drifted away from me, flowing back into the safe channels of flattery and gossip. The main course arrived filet mignon with a truffle reduction. As the servers placed the plates, a man sitting 2 seats down from my father cleared his throat. It was Mr. Henderson, a longtime business associate of my father and a structural engineer who worked on large commercial contracts. You know, speaking of logistics and algorithms, Mr. Henderson said, cutting into his steak. I was reading about that massive turnaround at Apex Horizon last week. Saved the shipping industry millions during that cyber attack. My ears pricked up. I kept my face impassive, cutting a precise piece of meat. Yes, incredible work, Mr. Henderson continued. I heard their operations team is being led by some new genius. They say the strategy used to isolate the virus was unlike anything the industry has seen. Julianne, sensing an opportunity to attach herself to another successful brand, leaned forward. Oh, Apex Horizon, she said, waving her fork dismissively. I know them well. In fact, I was just meeting with their board of directors last week. I froze. The piece of steak hovered halfway to my mouth. Really, mister? Henderson asked. Impressed? You are working with Apex. We are in late-stage talks. Julianne lied effortlessly. They are very interested in integrating my predictive software into their supply chain. I actually had lunch with their CEO, Marcus, just the other day. Lovely man. He practically begged me to sign an exclusive contract. He said, Julianne, we need your vision to save our infrastructure. I slowly lowered my fork. The lie was so bold, so easily verifiable, that it was almost breathtaking. Marcus, the CEO of Apex, was currently in Tokyo. He had been there for 2 weeks. And he definitely did not beg Julianne for anything, considering he was the one who had signed off on the termination of her boyfriend's vendor contract earlier that day. Is that so, mister? Henderson asked. That is huge. Julianne, Apex is a titan. It is. Julianne agreed. Preening, but they are dinosaurs. They need fresh blood. They need someone like me to show them how the modern world works. Honestly, their internal operations are a mess. I walked through their headquarters, and it felt like a library. No energy, no innovation. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. It was not a happy laugh. It was a dark, jagged thing. She was insulting my department, my team, and my work, while claiming to be my savior. She was describing a building she had never entered and a man she had never met. Judge Sterling, who had been silent until now, caught my eye from across the table. He raised an eyebrow. He knew where I worked, though not the specific title. He knew enough to know she was lying. Leona, Judge Sterling said, his voice deep and gravelly. Do not you work in that sector, logistics? The table quieted again. Patricia shot the judge a warning look. Oh, Leona just does data entry. Patricia interjected quickly. She types shipping codes. She wouldn't know anything about the board of directors or high-level strategy. Julianne laughed. Yeah, Leona is in the basement, essentially. She probably sees the trucks, but she does not see the map. Right. Leona. I looked at her. I looked at the grease shining on her chin. I looked at the fear hiding deep in her pupils, the fear that drove her to lie bigger and louder with every breath. Right, I said, my voice smooth as silk. I just see the trucks, but, I added, pausing to take a sip of wine. It is funny you mention Marcus. I heard he is a very private man. It is rare for him to take lunch meetings, especially when he is in Japan. Julianne froze. Her eyes darted to mine. He flew back, she stammered. For me? For the meeting, and then he flew back. That is a lot of jet lag for a lunch, I observed dryly. He is a dedicated CEO, Julianne snapped. Unlike some people, he understands the value of my time. Patricia clapped her hands together. Okay, enough shop talk. Let us not bore everyone with details. Julianne, tell us about the house hunt. I heard you are looking at the properties near the water. The conversation swerved away from the cliff edge, steered by my mother's desperate desire to keep the illusion intact. Julianne launched into a description of a waterfront mansion she could not afford. Describing the marble countertops and the heated floors, I ate my steak. It was perfectly cooked. I savored every bite. Let them talk. Let them build the tower of lies as high as it could go. Let them climb all the way to the top. The higher they climbed, the longer the fall. I glanced at my watch. The dessert course was next. The cake. The celebration. The execution. I tapped my foot against the briefcase under the table. It made a solid, reassuring thud. "Enjoy the steak, Julianne." I thought, "It is the last meal you will ever eat as the golden child." The filet mignon plates were cleared away, replaced by the heavy silence of anticipation that always precedes the ritual of gift-giving in the Whitestone household. This was my mother's favorite act in the play. It was the moment she could physically demonstrate the hierarchy of her affection. Patricia stood up, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. She signaled to the server, a young man I recognized from the catering company I had hired for my own corporate events, to bring out a small, velvet-wrapped box. "Julianne," my mother began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, "a visionary needs to move through the world in style. Your father and I wanted to give you something that matches your drive, something fast, something powerful." My father, who was nursing his third scotch, looked up with a start. He blinked at the box, clearly seeing it for the first time. The confusion on his face was heartbreakingly genuine. He had no idea what was inside, which meant he had no idea what debt had just been attached to his name. Patricia opened the box. Inside sat a car key fob, sleek and heavy, emblazoned with the logo of a luxury German automaker. "It is the new SUV coupe," Patricia announced, beaming at the gasps from the table. "The one with the panoramic roof you liked. It is parked in the garage right now," Julianne shrieked. It was a sound that pierced the air, equal parts delight and relief. She knew, just as I knew, that her current car had been repossessed 2 weeks ago, a fact she had hidden by claiming it was in the shop for custom upgrades. This gift was not just a luxury, it was a lifeline. "Oh my God." "Mom." "Dad," Julianne cried, reaching for the key. "This is amazing. Now I can drive to my client meetings in something that actually commands respect." She held the key up to the light, turning it like a jewel. The guests applauded politely. Uncle Robert clapped my father on the back, saying something about opening the wallet. My father forced a weak smile, his eyes darting to my mother with a question he was too afraid to ask in public. Then the room quieted, the spotlight, having bathed Julianne in its warm glow, now swiveled to the dark corner where I sat. Patricia turned to me. Her expression shifted instantly from adoration to a kind of weary, long-suffering benevolence. "And Leona," she said, her voice dropping to a volume that was meant to be intimate but carried to every corner of the room. "We know things are tight for you. We know you are still paying off those online courses and living in that rental. So please, do not feel bad about not having a big gift for your sister." She paused, letting the pity soak into the tablecloth. "Honestly, sweetie, the best gift you could give us is just to be less of a weight, to find your own footing so Julianne does not always have to worry about you." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten until they ached. The room was watching. The silence was suffocating. In fact, Patricia continued, brightening as if she had just had a brilliant idea. "Julianne, didn't you mention there was an opening at your new office?" Julianne looked up from her new car key, her eyes glittering with malice. She caught the pass from our mother and ran with it. "Oh, right," she exclaimed. "We are looking for a facilities coordinator. Basically, someone to handle the cleaning crew, stock the bathrooms, manage the trash rotation. It is a night shift." "Leona," she leaned forward, her smile toxic. "Honestly, the pay is probably better than what you get for typing numbers in that basement. And you would be working for me. I could protect you. I could make sure nobody yells at you when you get confused." "It is perfect. Don't let your brain go to waste. Leona, use your hands. That is what they are there for." A ripple of laughter went through the room. It was not raucous. It was the nervous, cruel tittering of people who were relieved they were not the target. Uncle Robert snickered. Aunt Donna shook her head with a sad smile. It was the perfect humiliation. In 2 minutes, they had reduced me to a janitor in my own sister's imaginary empire. They had stripped me of my dignity, my intelligence, and my autonomy, all under the guise of helping family. I sat there for a heartbeat. I looked at the crystal glass in my hand. I looked at the reflection of the chandelier in the wine. I looked at Judge Sterling, who was staring at me with an intensity that said, "Now. Do it now." I placed the glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the wood was sharp and definitive. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the parquet floor. A harsh, grating noise that cut through the laughter. The room went still. I stood up. I did not slouch. I did not look down. I stood to my full height, the heels giving me an extra 3 inches of leverage. I smoothed the front of my charcoal blazer with a slow, deliberate motion. "Thank you for the offer. Julianne," I said. My voice was not loud, but it projected to the back of the room with the clarity of a bell. "It is truly generous of you to think of me for the trash rotation." I paused, letting the sarcasm hang in the air for just a second before crushing it. "But I'm afraid my schedule is a bit too full for janitorial work." From the end of the table, a second cousin, a man I barely knew who worked in sales, snorted, busy doing what he called out, emboldened by the wine. "Counting pennies? Or are you busy trying to figure out how to pay for gas to get home?" The room erupted in a fresh wave of titters. I turned my head slowly to look at him. I did not blink. The laughter died in his throat as my gaze locked onto him. It was the same look I gave to underperforming vendors before I liquidated their contracts. "No," I said softly. "I am busy running a $40 million division." I reached down into my leather bag. The sound of the zipper opening was the only noise in the room. I pulled out the thick, brown-wrapped envelope. It looked heavy. It looked serious. I walked around the table. My heels clicked rhythmically on the floor. Click, 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 like a countdown. I stopped behind my father's chair. I did not look at Julianne. I did not look at my mother. I looked at my father, the man who had just unknowingly gone into debt for a car he could not afford. "I have a gift, too," I said. I tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed with a solid, authoritative thud in front of my father. "It is not a car key," I said, "but I think you will find it much more valuable." Patricia frowned, her hands fluttering nervously. "Leona, what is this, if it is some kind of homemade craft?" "Open it, Dad," I said, ignoring her. My father looked up at me, then down at the package. His hands were shaking slightly as he tore the paper. He pulled out the framed document. The glass caught the light. The gold seal of Apex Horizon shone brightly. He read the text. His eyes squinted, then widened. His mouth fell open. He read it again, moving his lips silently. "Leona Whitestone, Director of Operations, North America. Effective date, January 1st. Base compensation, 300 key, $50,000. He looked up at me. The confusion was gone, replaced by a shock so profound it looked like fear. "Director," he whispered. "You are a director." Patricia snatched the frame from his hands. "What? Give me that," she snapped. She stared at the document. Her eyes scanned the lines, desperate to find a flaw, a typo, a sign that it was a joke. This is fake," she stammered, her face flushing red. "You printed this off the internet. You are trying to trick us." "Leona, this is pathetic. Apex Horizon is a global corporation. They do not hire people like you for these roles." I smiled. It was a cold, wintry smile. "People like me?" I asked. "You mean people who can read a balance sheet better than you can read a room?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Google it." "Mother," I said. "Google Apex Horizon Leadership Team. The press release went live at 5 o'clock today." I waited, across the table. Judge Sterling pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times. He looked at the result. He looked up at the room, cleared his throat, and spoke. "She is right," the judge said, his voice booming like a verdict. "It is right here on Bloomberg. Apex Horizon promotes Leona Whitestone to Director of North American Operations. Citing her pivotal role in stabilizing the regional logistics grid, he turned his phone around to show the table. There was my photo, professional, sharp, commanding. The silence that followed was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum. The air had been sucked out of the room. Julianne was staring at the phone screen, Her glass of champagne tilted in her hand, spilling a steady stream of expensive liquid onto the tablecloth, but she did not notice. I turned to my sister. "So, about that job offer?" "Julianne," I said, my voice smooth and deadly, "I appreciate the concern for my career, but I think I will stick with mine. My signing bonus alone is more than your entire annual revenue at GlitterTech." I leaned in closer. "And by the way," I said, "my office is hiring a janitor. Since you are so passionate about the position, and since you are currently unemployed, should I send you an application?" A gasp went around the room. It was audible. It was physical. I had just dropped the first bomb, but I was not done. The briefcase was still under the table. The dossier was still waiting. The director had arrived. And she was just getting started. The silence in the dining room was absolute, a vacuum created by the sheer weight of the document lying on the tablecloth. My father, Robert, stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language that he was slowly, painfully learning to translate. His hands, usually steady from years of drafting blueprints, were trembling. He looked up at me, then back at the paper, his lips moving silently over the numbers that defined my new reality. $350,000, he whispered. The number hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that shattered the carefully constructed economy of our family. My father made a decent living, but this was a figure that eclipsed his peak earning years, and it was merely my base salary. Patricia moved faster than I had ever seen her move. She snatched the paper from his hands, the velvet jewelry box with the car key clattering to the floor in her haste. She held the letter up to the chandelier light, squinting at the embossed seal, her face twisting into a mask of frantic denial. "This is ridiculous," she spat, her voice rising to a shrill pitch that cracked the sophisticated veneer she had maintained all evening. "You actually expect us to believe this? You, Leona, the girl who needed a tutor to get through middle school English." She looked around the room, seeking allies, her eyes wide and desperate. "It is a forgery," she declared, waving the paper like a flag. "It has to be. Anyone can buy a printer and some heavy stock paper. She probably typed this up in that basement apartment of hers just to ruin Julianne's night. It is a prop, a sick, jealous joke." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply leaned back against the edge of the table, crossing my arms over the silk of my blouse. "It is a federal crime to forge a corporate officer's signature on a contract. Mother," I said calmly, "and considering my company handles government defense logistics, that would be treason adjacent. Do you really think I am that creative? Or that stupid?" Patricia scoffed, crumpling the edge of the paper. "You are desperate for attention. That is what you are. You could not stand that Julianne was getting a car, so you had to invent a fantasy job." I sighed. It was a sound of pure exhaustion, the sound of a woman tired of explaining gravity to people who insisted on floating. "I told you," I said, pointing to the smartphone lying next to Judge Sterling's plate. "Google it." The room erupted into a flurry of motion. It was almost comical. 12 wealthy, well-dressed people simultaneously diving for their pockets and purses. Screens lit up the dim room like fireflies. Thumbs tapped furiously. I watched Julianne. She did not reach for her phone. She sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the spilled champagne soaking into the tablecloth. She knew. Deep down, she had always known that the gap between us was not what our mother claimed it was. She just never thought I would bridge it publicly. "Oh my God," a cousin whispered from the end of the table. "What?" "What is it?" Aunt Donna demanded, peering over his shoulder. "It is real," the cousin said, looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. "It is on the Wall Street Journal tech feed. Apex Horizon announces strategic leadership overhaul. There is a picture." He held up his phone. The screen displayed my official corporate headshot, the one taken last week in the boardroom, where I looked sharp, formidable, and utterly unlike the cowering daughter they knew. Uncle Robert pulled up the Apex Horizon Investor Relations page. It lists the executive compensation packages for the new fiscal year, he muttered, scrolling down. Director of Operations. Tier 1 Equity Grant. Leona. This stock package. It is worth more than my house. The air left the room. My mother stood there, the paper shaking in her hand. Looking from the phone screens to my face, the denial was crumbling, replaced by a hollow, gaping shock. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who had broken into her home. But, she stammered, but you are the slow one. We had to help you. We had to protect you. You did not protect me, I said, my voice cutting like a laser. You hid me. There is a difference. I pushed off the table and took a step toward Julianne. She flinched, physically recoiling as if I were about to strike her. And speaking of protection, I said, turning my gaze to my sister, you mentioned earlier that you were in late-stage talks with the Apex board, that you had lunch with Marcus, that you were going to save our infrastructure. Julianne swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly. I might have misspoken about the specific. You lied, Julianne, I said, and it was a sloppy lie, because at 9 o'clock this morning, the first thing I did as director was review the pending vendor contracts. I paused, letting the room lean in. I saw a contract for a company called Vector Stream Services. I continued, low-level IT cabling, terribly overpriced, owned by a man named Kyle Davis. Julianne's eyes widened. A small, strangled noise escaped her throat. That is your boyfriend, isn't it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The investment banker. He was using a shell company to bill Apex for work he was barely doing. He was leeching off the company you claimed to be consulting for. I took a step closer. I signed the termination order myself. I said, I blacklisted his company from our entire supply chain, and then I flagged his previous invoices for a fraud audit. Kyle is going to be very busy with lawyers on Monday morning. So, no, Julianne, you are not on our potential hire list. You are on our liability list. Julianne burst into tears. It was sudden and ugly, her face crumpling as the reality of her boyfriend's impending legal doom and her loss of income crashed down on her. You ruined him, she screamed, slamming her hands on the table. You did that on purpose. You are a monster. I am thorough. I corrected her, and I am not done. I reached down and picked up the black leather briefcase I had placed by my feet. I set it on the table with a heavy thud. Right next to the car key my parents had foolishly bought. I clicked the latches open. The sound was like 2 gunshots in the quiet room. I pulled out the black binder, the second dossier. You called me a monster, I said, opening the folder. Let us see what we call a person who steals from their own mother. I pulled out the first document. It was the termination letter from Glittertech. You told everyone here you left Glittertech to start your own fund because you were too visionary for them, I said, holding the paper up for the room to see. But this is your separation notice. Dated October 15th. Terminated for falsification of expense reports and gross misconduct. You were fired for stealing company money. Julianne. I tossed the paper onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of Aunt Donna, who gasped. No, Patricia shrieked, lunging for the paper. Do not look at that. It is private. I pulled out the next document. This one was a bank statement. And this, I said, my voice growing colder, harder. This is a record of wire transfers. $8,000 from Mom's jewelry sale. $5,000 from Dad's retirement withdrawal, all funneled into your account to pay for an apartment you cannot afford and a lifestyle you use to impress people who do not care about you. I looked at my father. He was gray. He was staring at my mother with a look of absolute betrayal. You sold the jewelry, he whispered to Patricia. You told me it was at the cleaners. You took money from the IR. I did it for her, Patricia cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She needed a bridge loan. She is the special one. Robert. She just needed time. She had time, I yelled, my voice finally breaking the calm surface I had maintained. I let the anger flood the room, hot and righteous. She had 3 months. And what did she do with that time? Did she look for a job? Did she downsize? I pulled out the final document, The credit card statement? The one with my name on it? No, she stole my identity. I slammed the paper down in front of Julianne. $48,000. I said, that is how much you charged to accredit one card you opened using my social security number. You forged my signature. You added yourself as an authorized user. You spent my credit rating on dinners at Nobu and weekends at the plaza while I was eating frozen meals and saving every cent. The room was silent. This was not just drama anymore. This was a felony. This was prison time. Julianne was sobbing uncontrollably now, her face buried in her hands. Patricia was shaking her head, mumbling, "No, no, no," over and over again. You thought I was too stupid to check. I said to my mother, you thought slow Leona would never look at a credit report. You thought I was just a resource you could harvest to keep your golden statue shining. I looked at the guests. They looked sick. They looked at Julianne not with admiration, but with disgust. The facade was gone. The genius was a thief. The visionary was a fraud. I closed the briefcase. And just to be clear, I said, addressing the room one last time, I do not need your help. I do not need your charity. And I certainly do not need a job cleaning bathrooms. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single photograph. It was a picture of the view from my living room, the skyline of Chicago seen from 40 stories up, framed by floor-to-ceiling glass. I bought this 3 months ago, I said, tossing the photo onto the pile of evidence. It is a penthouse in the Marina District, 3 bedrooms, 2,000 square feet, paid in cash with my Q3 performance bonus. I looked at Julianne, who was peering through her fingers at the photo. No mortgage, I said, no cosigners, no parents selling heirlooms to cover the down payment. Just me, the slow one, the disappointment. I picked up my bag. I am leaving now. I said, I will be filing a police report for identity theft on Monday morning regarding the credit card. Julianne, I suggest you find a very good lawyer, and Mom. Patricia looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her world completely destroyed. Do not wait up, I said. I turned and walked toward the door. The sound of my heels on the hardwood was the only sound in the house, a steady, rhythmic march away from the wreckage of my past and into the future I had built with my own 2 hands. The explosion I had detonated in the dining room did not result in immediate silence. That had been the shockwave. Now came the debris. The room descended into a chaotic, ugly noise of recriminations and panic. Julianne was no longer the poised executive. She was a child caught with her hand in the jar. And she was screaming. It is not my fault, she wailed. Her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks, ruining the complexion she had spent hundreds of dollars to perfect. The market turned against me. The investors pulled out at the last second. I had to bridge the gap. Mom, I did it for us. I did it so we would not look like failures. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her voice cracking, and she has been hoarding money. She watched me struggle. She sat on a pile of cash while I was drowning. How is that fair, Patricia? My mother looked from Julianne's weeping form to me. I watched the gears in her mind turn. I watched her weigh the shame of the identity theft against the sudden, blinding reality of my net worth. She looked at the diamond earrings I was wearing, real ones. Not the paste she assumed they were. She looked at the bespoke suit. She looked at the letter that proved I was earning more in a year than she had likely saved in a decade. Survival instinct kicked in. She wiped her eyes, smoothed her dress, and took a step toward me. Her face softened into a grotesque parody of maternal concern. Leona, baby, she said, her voice trembling. Look at your sister. She is hysterical. She is not thinking straight. She reached out, trying to touch my arm. I took a step back, keeping the table between us. We can fix this, Patricia said, her desperation rising. You have done so well for yourself. I am so proud. I always knew you had it in you deep down. But now that you are comfortable, surely you can help. She gestured vaguely at the pile of evidence on the table. $48,000 is a lot of money to Julianne, she pleaded, but to you? With that salary. It is just a check. Leona, you could write it tonight. We could make this go away. We are family, and families forgive. Families clean up each other's messes. I stared at her. The audacity was so immense it was almost physical. Like a blow to the chest. She was asking me to pay for the crime committed against me. She was asking the victim to bail out the thief because the thief was her favorite. Family, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked her dead in the eyes. 10 minutes ago, you told the entire room I should apply to be a janitor. I said, my voice steady and cold. You laughed when Julianne offered me a job cleaning her toilets. You encouraged my cousins to mock me for being poor. I gestured to the stunned guests. Was I family then, I asked? Or does your definition of family only apply when you need a check? Patricia flinched, her mouth opening and closing. That was just a joke. Leona, she stammered. We were just teasing. You know how we are. I do know how you are. I said, that is exactly the problem. Your family only exists when I am the failure. You need me to be the loser so Julianne can feel like a winner. Well, the game is over. Mother, I am not playing the loser anymore, and I'm certainly not playing the bank. I turned to Julianne, who was sobbing into her napkin. I meant what I said about the police report. I told her, if I see my name, my social security number, or my signature on so much as a library card application from this day forward, I will not just sue you, I will prosecute you. I will hand over every piece of evidence in that briefcase to the district attorney, and I will testify against you with a smile on my face. Do you understand me? Julianne nodded frantically, unable to speak. Terrified by the stranger standing in her sister's shoes, I looked around the room. The atmosphere had shifted from mockery to a palpable, sweaty fear. Uncle Robert was staring at his plate, refusing to make eye contact. Aunt Donna, who had lectured me on credit card debt, looked pale, likely wondering if I knew about her own financial skeletons. The cousin who had asked if I was counting pennies looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. But beneath the fear, I saw something else. I saw the glint of greed. I saw the way Uncle Robert peeked at me, calculating. I saw the way the neighbor shifted his stance, preparing to approach me, perhaps to ask for a stock tip or a small loan. They were predators, all of them. They did not respect me. They just smelled blood and money. I picked up my briefcase. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I turned to the catering manager, who was standing by the kitchen door, looking uncomfortable. Excuse me, I said. He jumped. Yes, ma'am. Who is paying for this event, I asked. He hesitated, glancing at Julianne. Well, the contract is under Ms. Julianne's name, but the deposit check bounced yesterday. She told us she would have the full amount in cash tonight. $7,000. I nodded. Well, I said, raising my voice so the room could hear. I hope she has it, because I'm certainly not paying for it. I pointed to the bottles of vintage wine open on the table. This is her party, I said. These are her guests, and this is her bill. I walked toward the front door. The sound of my heels was the only rhythm in a room that had lost its heartbeat. No one tried to stop me. No one offered a coat. They parted like the Red Sea, terrified to touch the hem of my garment. I stepped out into the cold night air. The snow was falling harder now, coating the world in a pristine, white silence. It felt clean. It felt like a baptism. Leona, wait. The voice came from behind me. I paused halfway down the driveway, my hand on the door handle of my Porsche. I turned. It was my father. He had run out without his coat, the snowflakes melting on his gray hair. He looked old. For the first time, I saw him not as the imposing figure of my childhood, but as a tired, beaten man who had let his wife steer their ship into the rocks. Dad, I said, go back inside. You will catch a cold. Leona, please. He gasped, his breath pluming in the air. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know about the jewelry. I didn't know about the credit cards. I thought Julianne was doing well. I thought you were happy in your simple life. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. I said gently, it was easier to let Mom handle it. It was easier to believe the lie than to look at the truth. He slumped, the fight draining out of him. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am so sorry. Leona, I should have defended you. I should have been better." I looked at him. I felt a pang of sadness, a ghost of the love I had once craved from him. But I did not feel the urge to fix him. That was the old Leona's job. The new Leona had a company to run. "You cannot change the past." "Dad," I said. "But you can change what happens next. Mom and Julianne are in there right now, plotting how to spin this. They are going to try to drag you into their mess. They are going to ask you to mortgage the house to pay off Julianne's debts." I opened the car door. "Be the man of the house." "Dad," I said, "for once in your life, put your foot down. Do not let them ruin you too." I got into the car. I did not wait for his answer. I did not wait to see if he would finally find his spine. I pressed the start button, and the engine roared to life, a deep, guttural growl that shook the snow off the hood. I put the car in gear and pulled away. I watched him in the rearview mirror, a small, dark figure standing alone in the snow, shrinking smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed him whole. The drive back to the city was a blur of motion and light. I merged onto the highway, letting the speed climb. 60, 70, 80. The car handled the road with predatory grace. Cutting through the slush, I turned off the radio. I didn't need music. I needed the hum of the engine and the sound of my own breathing. For years, I had driven this road with a knot in my stomach, dreading the destination. Now, I felt nothing but a vast, expansive peace. The cord was cut. The weight was gone. I was not Leona the daughter, or Leona the sister. I was just Leona. I reached the city limits an hour later. The skyline rose up to meet me, a canyon of steel and glass glittering against the night sky. It was my world, a world of logic, of consequences, of merit. A world where you were judged by what you built, not who you pretended to be. I pulled into the private underground garage of my building. The valet nodded respectfully as I tossed him the keys. "Good evening, Ms. Whitestone," he said. "Good evening," I replied. I took the elevator up to the penthouse. The doors slid open directly into my living room. The space was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city outside. I kicked off my heels, letting them lie where they fell on the plush rug. I walked to the kitchen, opened the wine fridge, and pulled out a bottle of Pinot Noir that cost $300. I didn't pour it for show. I poured it because I liked the taste. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out. The city was spread out below me like a circuit board, alive with energy. Somewhere down there, in a suburban house filled with fake flowers and unpaid bills, my family was likely screaming at each other. They were drowning in the reality I had forced them to face. My phone buzzed on the counter. I walked over and picked it up. 5 missed calls from Mom, 3 missed calls from Julianne, a text from Uncle Robert Leona about that stock tip, a text from Aunt Donna Leona. "Dear, I hope I didn't offend you earlier. Let's do lunch." I looked at the notifications. They were trying to claw their way back in. They were trying to reattach the parasite to the host. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt done. I tapped the screen. Block contact, block contact, block contact. I went through the list, one by one, severing the digital ties just as I had severed the emotional ones. Silence fell over the device. I took a sip of wine. It was rich, complex, and perfect. I walked back to the window. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. The woman in the reflection was not a girl waiting for permission to speak. She was not a shadow. She was the director of operations. She was the owner of this penthouse, and for the first time in 29 years, she was the undisputed owner of her own life. The joke was over. The punchline had been delivered, and the audience had been left in the dark. I raised my glass to the city lights, to Leona. I whispered, and I drank. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please drop your city or country in the comments below, so we can see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed seeing Leona take back her power, Please subscribe to the Healing Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share these stories with more people who need to hear them. Stay strong.